Bartender disappeared in 1998. Night Shift Mystery, Chapter 1. The Last Night. November 14th, 1998. Started like any other Friday night at the River's Edge pub in downtown Ottawa. The establishment sat on Spark Street, a pedestrian mall that bustled during the day with government workers and tourists, but quieted considerably after dark. The pub itself was a modest two-story brick building that had operated under various names since the 1970s, currently owned by Marcus Delvecchio, a businessman whose other ventures remained somewhat mysterious to his employees. Jennifer Walsh arrived for her shift at 6 o'clock that evening, exactly as scheduled. At 26, Jennifer had been working at River's Edge for just over 2 years, covering primarily evening and night shifts while she pursued a degree in psychology at Carleton University. She was known among the staff as reliable, professional, and capable of handling the rowdier customers that sometimes frequented the establishment late at night. "Hey Jen, you're closing tonight, right?" Denise Cartwright, the other bartender on duty, asked, as Jennifer tied her apron and began checking inventory behind the bar. "Yeah, Marcus asked me to handle it. You're off at midnight?" Jennifer replied, pulling her dark blonde hair back into a practical ponytail. "Thank God. I've got my cousin's wedding tomorrow and I need to not look like death." Denise laughed, already mixing drinks for a group of early arrivals. "You sure you're okay closing solo? Friday nights can get weird." Jennifer shrugged. "I've done it dozens of times. Besides, the tips are better when I don't have to split them." What neither woman knew was that this would be the last conversation they would ever have. The evening progressed normally. The pub filled with the usual Friday night crowd, office workers unwinding after the week, university students pre-drinking before hitting the clubs on Rideau Street, regulars who occupied the same stools week after week. Jennifer moved efficiently behind the bar, mixing drinks, pulling pints, making small talk with customers while keeping a professional distance. Craig Morrison arrived around 9:30. He was a regular, mid-40s, worked in IT for one of the government departments downtown. He always sat at the far end of the bar and always ordered the same thing, Molson Canadian, bottle not draft. Over the past 6 months, Craig had developed a habit of lingering until closing time on nights when Jennifer worked, engaging her in conversation whenever the bar wasn't too busy. "Slow night," Craig commented as Jennifer set his beer down on a coaster. "It'll pick up." "Always does around 10:30, Jennifer replied, already moving to serve another customer. Craig watched her work, his eyes following her movements with an intensity that made some of the other staff uncomfortable, though Jennifer had never complained about him directly. Tyler Hoffman showed up around 11:15, just as the crowd was reaching its peak. Tyler was Jennifer's on-again, off-again boyfriend of 8 months, a relationship that had become increasingly strained over the past few weeks. He was 28, worked construction, and had a temper that flared when he'd been drinking. Jennifer's expression tightened when she saw him push through the door. Tyler walked directly to the bar, ignoring the crowded tables. "We need to talk," Tyler said, his voice already carrying an edge. "I'm working, Tyler. This isn't the time." Jennifer kept her voice low, aware of the customers around them. "You've been avoiding my calls all week. When is the time?" "Not now. I'll call you tomorrow." Jennifer turned to serve another customer, but Tyler grabbed her wrist across the bar. "Don't walk away from me." Denise immediately stepped in. "Hey, back off. She said she's working." Tyler released Jennifer's wrist but didn't leave. "Tomorrow. We're having this conversation tomorrow, Jen. I mean it." He stalked out of the pub, letting the door slam behind him. Several customers had noticed the confrontation, and Jennifer forced a smile back onto her face, trying to project that everything was fine. "You okay?" Denise asked quietly. "Yeah, it's complicated. I'm handling it." But Jennifer's hands trembled slightly as she poured the next drink. Denise left at midnight as scheduled, heading out with a cheerful goodbye and a reminder for Jennifer to lock the door properly. "And don't let Craig overstay his welcome. That guy gives me the creeps." "I'll be fine," Jennifer assured her. The crowd began to thin out after midnight. By 1:30, only a handful of customers remained. Craig was still at his usual spot, nursing what was probably his 5th or 6th beer of the night. A couple occupied one of the booths, more interested in each other than their drinks. 2 university-aged guys played pool in the back room. At 2 o'clock, Jennifer announced last call. The couple left immediately. The university students finished their game and headed out around 2:15. Craig remained. "Come on, Craig. Time to go. I need to close up," Jennifer said, beginning to wipe down the bar. "Just finishing this," Craig replied, taking deliberately slow sips from his bottle. "You can finish it, but then you're out. I've got to clean and cash out." Craig finally drained his beer and stood up, swaying slightly. "Same time next week?" "Sure. Have a good weekend." Craig. Jennifer watched him leave, waited to hear the door close, then walked over and locked it from the inside. The pub's security camera, mounted near the entrance, captured her turning the deadbolt at exactly 2:23 in the morning. For the next 14 minutes, the security footage showed Jennifer moving around the pub, visible intermittently as she moved in and out of the camera's range. She was cleaning tables, collecting glasses, wiping down surfaces. At 2:37, the footage showed her approaching the door with her jacket on, her purse over her shoulder, and a bank deposit bag in her hand. She unlocked the deadbolt, stepped outside, turned back to lock the door from the exterior, and then walked out of frame toward the parking lot. That was the last time Jennifer Walsh was seen. When Jennifer didn't show up for her shift on Saturday evening, Marcus Delvecchio was annoyed, but not particularly concerned. Jennifer had never been unreliable before, but there was a first time for everything. He tried calling her apartment multiple times but got no answer. He left messages that became increasingly irritated as the evening progressed, and he had to scramble to find coverage. By Sunday morning, when Jennifer still hadn't responded to multiple calls and messages, Marcus contacted her emergency contact, her father, Robert Walsh. Robert hadn't heard from his daughter since Thursday evening when they'd had their weekly phone call. She'd sounded tired but normal, talked about her upcoming exams, mentioned she was working a closing shift on Friday. Nothing concerning. Robert drove immediately to Jennifer's apartment on Somerset Street, a modest one-bedroom unit she'd lived in for 3 years. He used the emergency key Jennifer had given him to let himself in. The apartment was quiet, undisturbed. Jennifer's bed was made. Her school books were stacked on the dining table. There was no sign of a struggle, no indication she'd been home recently. Growing concerned, Robert called his younger daughter Miranda, then called the Ottawa Police Service. By Sunday afternoon, Detective Sarah Brennan of the Ottawa Police was sitting in Robert Walsh's living room in the suburb of Nepean, taking down information for a missing persons report. Brennan was a veteran investigator in her early 40s, her dark hair cut short and practical, her manner professional but not unsympathetic. "When was the last time you spoke with Jennifer?" Brennan asked. "Thursday night. We talk every Thursday. Have for years. She called me around 8 o'clock. We talked for maybe 20 minutes. How did she seem? Was anything bothering her?" "She was tired, stressed about exams coming up, but nothing unusual. She mentioned she was working Friday and Saturday nights, then planned to spend Sunday studying." Robert's voice cracked slightly. "This isn't like her, Detective. Jennifer is responsible. She doesn't just not show up for work. She doesn't ignore phone calls. Tell me about her personal life. Boyfriend? Friends? Any conflicts or problems she'd mentioned?" Robert hesitated. "She was seeing someone. Tyler Hoffman. I met him once, maybe 2 months ago. Didn't particularly like him. But Jennifer's an adult, makes her own choices. She'd mentioned recently that things weren't going well with him, that she was thinking of ending it." Brennan made notes. "Any threats? Violence?" "Not that she told me, but Jennifer doesn't always tell me everything. You'd have to ask her sister Miranda. They're closer. Talk more often." Miranda Walsh arrived within the hour. At 23, she bore a strong resemblance to her sister. The same blonde hair, the same blue-green eyes, though Miranda wore hers long and straight, while Jennifer's was usually pulled back practically. Miranda worked as a paralegal at a downtown law firm and lived in an apartment not far from Jennifer's. "I talked to Jen on Friday afternoon," Miranda told Detective Brennan. "She called me on her break at school, around 3 o'clock. She seemed okay, maybe a little stressed." "Did she mention her plans for that evening, after her shift?" "Just that she was closing the bar and then going straight home. She had to work again Saturday, so she wasn't planning to stay out late or anything." "What about her boyfriend, Tyler?" Miranda's expression darkened. "He's a problem. Jen was trying to break up with him, but he wasn't accepting it. He kept calling her, showing up places. She was actually a little scared of him, I think, though she tried to play it off like it was fine." "Scared how? Did he threaten her?" "Not directly, but he's got a temper. He'd show up at her apartment unexpectedly, accuse her of seeing other guys, make scenes. Jen told me he'd grabbed her arm once during an argument, left bruises. She said she was going to end it completely, but she was waiting for the right time." Brennan underlined something in her notebook. "I'll need Tyler Hoffman's contact information." The investigation moved quickly once it was officially opened. Detective Brennan went to River's Edge pub Sunday evening and spoke with Marcus Del Vecchio, who seemed nervous and defensive. "I don't know anything about her personal life," Marcus said, standing behind the bar while Sunday's bartender served customers. "She showed up, did her work, went home. Professional girl. I need to see your security footage from Friday night." Marcus hesitated. "The system's kind of old. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it doesn't. But it was working Friday night? I'd have to check." "Please check." The footage was intact, showing exactly what the police needed to establish a timeline. Brennan watched it multiple times, noting every detail. Jennifer arriving at 6 o'clock. The confrontation with Tyler around 11:15. Craig Morrison lingering until after 2. Jennifer locking up and leaving at 2:37. "Who's this?" Brennan asked, freezing the footage on Craig. "Craig Morrison, regular customer. Comes in a few times a week. Tell me about him." Marcus shrugged. "Quiet guy. IT worker or something. Always polite. Tips okay. Why? He stays until after 2 in the morning. Well past last call. Some regulars like to linger. Jennifer could handle it." Brennan made a note to locate Craig Morrison. Tyler Hoffman was easier to find. He lived in a basement apartment in Vanier and worked for a construction company based in Canada. Brennan and her partner, Detective Michael Chen, visited him Monday morning. Tyler answered the door shirtless, clearly having just woken up despite it being nearly 10 o'clock. He was muscular, tattoos covering both arms, his dark hair disheveled. "Tyler Hoffman?" Brennan showed her badge. "Yeah, what's this about? When's the last time you saw Jennifer Walsh?" Tyler's expression shifted, became guarded. "Friday night." "Why? What's happened?" "Jennifer's been missing since Friday night. We're trying to establish her movements. You were at River's Edge pub around 11:15. "Yeah, I stopped by to talk to her." "About what?" "Relationship stuff, personal stuff." "Look, is Jen okay? Where is she?" "That's what we're trying to determine. Several witnesses say your conversation with Jennifer was heated. You grabbed her wrist." Tyler ran a hand through his hair. "We had a disagreement. It wasn't a big deal. I left, went home, didn't see her again." "What time did you get home?" "I don't know. 11:30? Midnight? I went to bed." "Alone?" "Yeah, alone." "Can you tell me what's going on? Is Jen in some kind of trouble? Where were you between 2 and 4 in the morning on Saturday?" Tyler's eyes widened. "I was asleep, in bed, alone. Jesus, do you think something happened to her? Do you think I—" He stopped, seemed to realize the direction the questions were going. "I want a lawyer." "You're not under arrest, Mr. Hoffman. We're just asking questions." "Yeah, well, I'm not answering any more without a lawyer present. If something's happened to Jen, I had nothing to do with it. We had problems, but I wouldn't hurt her." The detectives left Tyler's apartment with more questions than answers. His defensive reaction was notable, but it could be genuine shock rather than guilt. They needed more information. Craig Morrison worked at Public Services and Procurement Canada, a department within the federal government. Brennan and Chen visited his office Monday afternoon. Craig was a thin, pale man with receding hair and nervous mannerisms. He sat across from the detectives in a conference room, hands clasped together on the table. "I heard about Jennifer," he said before they could ask their first question. "Someone from the pub called me this morning." "Is it true she's missing?" "Yes. We understand you were one of the last people to see her Friday night." "I was at the pub, yes. I'm there most Friday nights. The security footage shows you staying until after 2 in the morning, well past closing time." Craig shifted uncomfortably. "Jennifer let regulars finish their drinks sometimes. She was nice like that." "Tell us about your relationship with Jennifer." "We were friends. Friendly. Customer and bartender friendly. I'd talk to her when the bar wasn't busy." "Did you ever ask her out? Express romantic interest?" Craig's face flushed. Maybe I suggested we could get coffee sometime. She said no. She had a boyfriend. I respected that. But you continued to come to the pub specifically on nights she worked. It's a public establishment. I'm allowed to be there. What time did you leave Friday night?" "Around 2:25, 2:30. Jennifer said she had to close up, so I left. Walked to my car and drove home." "Where do you live?" "Sandy Hill. About a 10-minute drive from the pub." "Did you see where Jennifer went after she locked up?" "No. I walked to my car, got in and left. I didn't see her in the parking lot." "What kind of car do you drive?" "A 2001 Buick LeSabre, dark blue." After Craig left, Chen turned to Brennan. "He's lying about something." "Yeah, but what? Let's pull his phone records, see who he called that night." On Tuesday, November 17th, 3 days after Jennifer's disappearance, A woman walking her dog along the Ottawa River pathway near Britannia Park found Jennifer's car. The 1995 Honda Civic was parked in a small lot that served the pathway, keys in the ignition, driver's door unlocked. The discovery brought a flurry of police activity. The car was immediately impounded and processed for evidence. Inside, investigators found Jennifer's purse on the passenger seat, her wallet intact with her ID and $43 in cash. Her cell phone, a relatively new Nokia, was in the center console, battery dead. The bank deposit bag from the pub was missing. She didn't run away, Robert Walsh said, when Brennan called to inform him of the discovery. If she was running away, she'd take her purse, her ID, her phone. We're treating this as a serious investigation, Mr. Walsh. We're doing everything we can. The phone records arrived Wednesday. Jennifer's last call had been made Friday afternoon at 3:12, the call to her sister Miranda that Miranda had mentioned. Before that, calls to her father Thursday night, a few friends during the week, multiple calls to and from Tyler's number over the previous 2 weeks. Tyler's phone records showed he'd called Jennifer 6 times on Friday, at 9 in the morning, noon, 3 in the afternoon, 5:30, 8 in the evening, and finally at 10:45, about half an hour before he showed up at the pub. All calls had gone to voicemail. Craig Morrison's phone records were interesting. He'd made no calls Friday night, but Saturday morning at 7:30, he'd called the pub. The call lasted 18 seconds. When questioned about it, Craig claimed he'd just wanted to confirm the pub's hours for the weekend. Why would you call to ask about hours at 7:30 in the morning when the pub doesn't open until 11? Brennan asked. I don't know. I was just checking. Is that a crime? It wasn't a crime, but it was odd. The forensic analysis of Jennifer's car took several days. Fingerprints were lifted, Jennifer's naturally, but also several unidentified prints. DNA samples were collected from the driver's seat, the steering wheel, the door handles. The problem was that none of it pointed to anything conclusive. Jennifer's car wasn't a crime scene, just an abandoned vehicle. What troubled investigators most was the location. Britannia Park was approximately 15 kilometers from the River's Edge pub. Why would Jennifer drive there at 3 in the morning? It wasn't on her route home. There was no reason for her to be in that area. Either someone forced her to drive there, Chen theorized, or someone else drove her car there after something happened to her. But the security footage shows her leaving alone, Brennan countered. No one got in her car with her. Could someone have been waiting in her car, hiding in the back seat? It was possible. The pub's parking lot had minimal lighting. If someone had broken into Jennifer's car earlier in the evening and hidden in the back seat, they could have confronted her when she got in. But who? And why? The investigation expanded. Police interviewed everyone who'd been at River's Edge pub Friday night. Most remembered nothing unusual. A few remembered the confrontation between Jennifer and Tyler. No one remembered seeing anyone suspicious near the parking lot. Marcus Del Vecchio was interviewed multiple times. His financial records were examined when it became clear that River's Edge pub had some irregularities in its bookkeeping. Marcus became defensive, hired a lawyer, and stopped cooperating fully with the investigation. What are you hiding? Brennan asked during one particularly tense interview. Nothing relevant to Jennifer. My business dealings are my own. Your bartender is missing. Your business dealings might be very relevant. I run a bar, detective. Sometimes cash transactions aren't perfectly documented. That doesn't mean I know anything about what happened to Jennifer. A week after Jennifer's disappearance, with no body, no ransom demand, no credible leads, the case began to slow down. Media coverage had been intense initially. Young woman disappears mysteriously in Ottawa. But without new developments, the story faded from headlines. Robert and Miranda Walsh refused to let it fade. They created missing person posters and plastered them across Ottawa. They organized search parties to comb areas near where Jennifer's car had been found. They gave interviews to anyone who would listen. They hired a private investigator, a former police detective named Lawrence Winters, who specialized in missing persons cases. Winters brought fresh eyes to the evidence. He re-interviewed witnesses, looked for patterns the police might have missed, followed up on leads that had been deemed unimportant. One lead Winters found particularly interesting was a statement from Denise Cartwright, Jennifer's coworker, that hadn't been fully explored by police. Denise mentioned that Jennifer had been acting secretive in the weeks before her disappearance, taking mysterious phone calls and stepping outside to talk privately. She was definitely hiding something, Denise told Winters. I asked her about it once, and she brushed it off, said it was just personal stuff, but it felt like more than that. Winters also discovered something the police had noted. but not pursued aggressively. Jennifer's bank records showed she'd been making regular deposits into a savings account, $200 every 2 weeks for the past 4 months. That was unusual given her student loans and modest income. Where was she getting extra money? Winters asked Robert Walsh. I don't know. She never mentioned a second job. But Jennifer had mentioned something to Miranda. In one of their conversations about a month before she disappeared, Jennifer had said she was doing some freelance work to save up money. She'd been vague about what kind of work, and Miranda hadn't pressed for details. Winters began investigating whether Jennifer had been working another job under the table, perhaps something that put her in contact with dangerous people. Chapter 2. Secrets Uncovered. As November turned to December and the Ottawa winter set in, the investigation into Jennifer Walsh's disappearance continued to frustrate everyone involved. Detective Brennan worked the case whenever her caseload allowed, but without new evidence, there was only so much she could do. The Walsh family, meanwhile, refused to give up. Private investigator Lawrence Winters proved to be more persistent than the overworked police. He spent hours going through every detail of Jennifer's life in the months before her disappearance, looking for the secret she'd been keeping. The break came from an unexpected source. In mid-December, Winters received a call from a woman named Patricia Rousseau, who'd seen the missing person posters around downtown Ottawa. I think I knew Jennifer Walsh, Patricia said. Or at least, I think she worked for the same company I did. Winters met Patricia at a coffee shop on Elgin Street. She was in her early 30s, well-dressed, professional-looking. She explained that she worked as an escort for a high-end agency called Executive Companions that catered to business travelers and wealthy clients. I don't usually come forward about this kind of thing, Patricia said nervously. But when I saw Jennifer's picture, I recognized her. She went by the name Amber with the agency. Winters kept his expression neutral, though his pulse quickened. When did Jennifer work for this agency? She started maybe 6 months ago? She didn't work often, maybe twice a month, usually on weekday evenings when she said she didn't have other commitments. The agency only books professional, discreet encounters. Nothing illegal, just companionship for dinners, events, that kind of thing. Was Jennifer working for the agency the night she disappeared? I don't know. I didn't work that weekend. But you could ask the agency owner, Diane Mercier. She keeps records of all bookings. Winters immediately contacted Detective Brennan with this information. Brennan, in turn, contacted Diane Mercier. Executive Companions operated legally, providing companionship services that carefully skirted prostitution laws. Diane Mercier was a shrewd businesswoman in her 50s, who ran her agency with strict rules and careful screening of both clients and escorts. Yes, Jennifer Walsh worked for me, Diane confirmed when Brennan visited her office in a discreet building in Centertown. She approached me last summer, said she needed money for school, and heard through a friend that I hired university students for occasional work. I interviewed her, explained exactly what the job entailed, and she agreed. What did the job entail? Brennan asked. Accompanying clients to dinners, business functions, social events, conversation, companionship. My contracts explicitly forbid sexual services. If clients want more than companionship, they have to negotiate that privately with the escorts, and it's not facilitated through my agency. Did Jennifer ever mention problems with clients? Anyone who made her uncomfortable? Diane hesitated. There was one situation about a month before she disappeared. A client named Richard Beaumont. He'd booked Jennifer for a business dinner at the Chateau Laurier. Afterward, he apparently became aggressive, tried to pressure her to come to his hotel room. Jennifer refused and left. She filed a complaint with me, and I banned Beaumont from using the agency's services. I'll need Richard Beaumont's contact information. Of course. Diane's records showed that Jennifer had not been booked for any assignments on Friday, November 14th. Her last booking had been the previous Wednesday, accompanying a client to a restaurant in the market. Richard Beaumont turned out to be a Toronto-based businessman who frequently traveled to Ottawa for government contract meetings. He was in his 50s, married, with a reputation for aggressive behavior that had gotten him banned from more than just executive companions. When Brennan contacted him, Beaumont was dismissive and lawyered up immediately. His attorney confirmed that Beaumont had been in Toronto the weekend of Jennifer's disappearance, attending his daughter's university graduation. There were dozens of witnesses and photographs to confirm his alibi. Another dead end. But at least they'd uncovered Jennifer's secret source of income. The $200 every 2 weeks made sense now. What they didn't know was whether this escort work had anything to do with her disappearance. Robert Walsh was devastated when he learned about Jennifer's secret job. Why didn't she tell me she needed money? I would have helped her. She didn't need to do that. She was an adult making her own choices, Winters said gently. And from everything we've learned, she was careful, professional, and the work was legal. This doesn't change who she was, but it did complicate the investigation. Had Jennifer encountered someone dangerous through her escort work? Someone who'd become obsessed with her? Someone who'd followed her to the pub that Friday night? Diane Mercier provided a list of all clients Jennifer had met through the agency over the 6 months she'd worked there. It was a relatively short list. Jennifer had only taken assignments occasionally, and most were repeat clients, established businessmen whose backgrounds Diane had vetted. Brennan and her team methodically tracked down and interviewed every client. Most were cooperative once their initial panic about being connected to an escort agency subsided. All had alibis for the night of Jennifer's disappearance. None seemed like viable suspects. Meanwhile, the original suspects hadn't been cleared. Tyler Hoffman remained at the top of the list. His temper, his possessiveness, his confrontation with Jennifer just hours before she disappeared, all of it pointed to him. But without evidence, without a body, there was nothing to charge him with. Tyler had hired a lawyer and stopped talking to police. His lawyer released a statement saying Tyler was cooperating fully with the investigation, but maintaining his innocence in whatever had happened to Jennifer. Craig Morrison also remained a person of interest. His obsessive attention to Jennifer, his suspicious behavior the night she disappeared, his odd phone call to the pub the next morning. None of it was criminal, but all of it was concerning. When Brennan questioned Craig again about whether he'd known about Jennifer's escort work, his reaction was revealing. What? No, Jennifer wasn't like that. She was a good girl, a student. She wouldn't... He trailed off, his face flushing red. You're lying. You're trying to trick me. We have confirmed that Jennifer worked occasionally for an escort agency. Were you aware of this? Craig's hands clenched into fists. If I'd known some guy was paying to spend time with her. That she was... He stopped himself. I want to leave now. Did you ever pay for Jennifer's company, Mr. Morrison? Through the agency or privately? I'm leaving. Don't contact me again without a warrant. Craig's reaction suggested genuine shock, but it also revealed the depth of his obsession with Jennifer. In his mind, she'd been something pure, untouchable. Learning she worked as an escort shattered that image. As Christmas approached, the investigation had stalled again. No new leads, no body, no evidence of foul play beyond the abandoned car. Jennifer Walsh had simply vanished. The Walsh family held a prayer vigil at Notre Dame Cathedral on Christmas Eve, hoping for Jennifer's safe return. Over 200 people attended, including many of Jennifer's friends from university, co-workers from the pub, and community members who'd been following her story in the media. Detective Brennan attended as well, standing at the back and watching the crowd. She'd learned over her years in law enforcement that perpetrators sometimes attended vigils for their victims, unable to resist the attention or wanting to monitor the investigation's progress. She noticed Tyler Hoffman standing near the back corner, his expression unreadable. Craig Morrison was there too, openly crying, causing several people to glance at him uncomfortably. Marcus Del Vecchio had sent flowers but didn't attend in person. After the vigil, Brennan approached Tyler. Thank you for coming. Tyler nodded. I loved her. Whatever you think of me, whatever problems we had, I loved Jen. I hope you find her. If there's anything you haven't told us, Tyler, anything that might help, I've told you everything. I went to the pub. We argued. I left. That's all I know. His voice was hollow, defeated. I lie awake every night wondering if I was the last person to see her alive. If I'd stayed. If I'd waited for her to close up. If I'd been there when she walked to her car, maybe she'd still be here. It was the most emotion Tyler had shown since the investigation began. Brennan couldn't tell if it was genuine remorse or skilled acting. The new year brought renewed attention to the case. In January 1999, a national television program about unsolved mysteries featured Jennifer's disappearance. The segment included interviews with the Walsh family, surveillance footage from the pub, and a reconstruction of Jennifer's last known movements. The program generated dozens of tips, most of which led nowhere. People claimed to have seen Jennifer in Vancouver, Montreal, even as far away as Florida. All were investigated, and all proved to be misidentifications or hoaxes. But one tip stood out. An anonymous caller to the police tip line said, "Check the pub owner's connections. Jennifer knew too much about the wrong people." When Brennan followed up, pressing for more details, the caller hung up. The call had come from a payphone on Rideau Street. The voice had been distorted, possibly electronically altered. Brennan returned to Marcus Del Vecchio, this time with a warrant for his financial records and business documents. What she found suggested that River's Edge pub was being used to launder money for organized crime figures operating in Ottawa. Marcus finally agreed to talk, with his lawyer present. "I run a legitimate business," Marcus insisted. "Sometimes I do favors for people, allow them to use my establishment for meetings, that kind of thing. But I'm not involved in anything illegal." "Who are these people you do favors for?" Marcus's lawyer intervened. "My client isn't going to speculate about the activities of his customers." Did Jennifer know about these arrangements? For the first time, Marcus looked genuinely worried. She was a bartender. She served drinks, cleaned up, went home. She didn't know anything, but she worked late shifts. She was there when these meetings happened. She would have seen people, overheard conversations. Marcus was silent. "Did someone threaten Jennifer because of what she'd seen or heard at your pub?" "I don't know. I swear, I don't know what happened to her." The investigation into River's Edge pub and its connections opened up an entirely new avenue. Brennan worked with the RCMP's organized crime unit, identifying several individuals connected to drug trafficking and illegal gambling who'd frequented the pub. One name came up repeatedly: Vincent Calabresi, a mid-level organized crime figure from Montreal who'd been expanding operations into Ottawa. Several witnesses confirmed that Calabresi had been at River's Edge pub multiple times in the months before Jennifer disappeared, usually late at night. Finding Calabresi proved difficult. He was careful, rarely staying in one place long, using intermediaries for most of his business. When police finally located and interviewed him in March of 1999, he denied knowing anything about Jennifer Walsh. "I don't know every bartender at every place I have a drink," Calabresi said through his lawyer. "The girl disappeared? That's unfortunate. I hope you find her. But I had nothing to do with it." Calabresi's alibi for November 14th was solid. He'd been in Montreal, confirmed by multiple sources, including surveillance footage from a restaurant where he'd been having dinner with associates. But that didn't mean someone working for Calabresi hadn't been involved. If Jennifer had overheard something sensitive, if she'd been perceived as a threat, organized crime didn't hesitate to eliminate problems. The theory that Jennifer had been killed by organized crime because of something she'd witnessed at the pub became the working hypothesis. But proving it seemed impossible. Without a body, without witnesses, without any physical evidence connecting anyone to her disappearance, the case remained frustratingly open. Robert Walsh, aged 10 years in the first year after Jennifer disappeared. He became obsessed with the investigation, spending hours every day reviewing evidence, following up on tips, pushing police to continue working the case. Miranda tried to maintain some semblance of normal life, but the shadow of her missing sister hung over everything. She changed jobs, moved to a different apartment, started seeing a therapist to deal with the trauma. "Do you think she's still alive?" Miranda asked Detective Brennan during one of their regular update meetings in the summer of 1999. Brennan chose her words carefully. "I think that after this much time, with no contact, no sightings, no demands for money, we have to prepare for the possibility that Jennifer isn't coming home. But without a body, there's always hope, right?" "Yes, there's always hope." Chapter 3. The truth emerges. Years passed. The investigation into Jennifer Walsh's disappearance officially remained open, but active work on the case dwindled as newer cases demanded attention and resources. Detective Brennan moved to a different unit. Detective Chen retired. The file boxes containing evidence and reports were stored in the police archives, pulled out occasionally when a new tip came in or when a journalist doing a retrospective piece on unsolved Ottawa mysteries requested information. Robert Walsh never gave up. Even as his health declined, a heart attack in 2002, diabetes diagnosed in 2004, he continued to mark every anniversary of Jennifer's disappearance with renewed appeals for information. He maintained a website dedicated to finding Jennifer, updated with any new developments, no matter how minor. Miranda eventually married and had children of her own, but she named her daughter Jennifer, in memory of her sister. She told her children about the aunt they'd never meet, keeping her sister's memory alive. Tyler Hoffman left Ottawa in 2001, moving to British Columbia. He married, divorced, remarried. He never spoke publicly about Jennifer again, though friends said he carried guilt about their last confrontation until the day he died in a motorcycle accident in 2015. Craig Morrison continued working his government job until retirement. He never married. Co-workers described him as increasingly isolated and bitter. In 2007, he was arrested for stalking a younger female colleague, receiving a suspended sentence and mandatory counseling. Marcus Delvecchio sold River's Edge pub in 2003 after the organized crime investigation resulted in charges against several of his associates. He moved to Florida, where he operated a small restaurant that eventually failed. He died of liver disease in 2012. The breakthrough in Jennifer Walsh's case came in 2008, exactly 10 years after her disappearance. A construction crew working on a development project in the rural area of Carp, about 30 kilometers west of Ottawa, was excavating a wooded lot that had been purchased for a new subdivision. On May 22nd, an operator digging with a backhoe struck something that wasn't rock or soil. It was a shallow grave. The Ottawa police forensic team that responded to the scene carefully excavated the remains of a human body that had been buried approximately 10 years earlier. The decomposition was extensive, but enough remained for analysis. Clothing fragments, jewelry, and dental records would provide identification. The victim was Jennifer Walsh. The news hit the Walsh family like a second tragedy. For 10 years, they'd held on to hope. Irrational perhaps, but hope nonetheless, that Jennifer might somehow still be alive, suffering from amnesia, held captive, living under an assumed identity somewhere. The discovery of her remains ended that hope, but it also provided answers. The forensic pathologist determined that Jennifer had died from blunt force trauma to the head. She'd been struck multiple times with a heavy object, causing fatal injuries. The body had been wrapped in a tarp, fragments of which still remained, and buried in a pre-dug grave, suggesting premeditation. The location was significant. The wooded lot in Carp was owned by a numbered company. When investigators traced the ownership, they found it led back to a property development firm that had ties to Vincent Calabresi's criminal organization. The organized crime connection that Detective Brennan had suspected 10 years earlier was confirmed. But Vincent Calabresi had died in 2005, killed in a power struggle within his organization. He would never face justice for Jennifer's murder. The investigation was reopened with renewed vigor. New forensic techniques not available in 1998 were applied to the evidence. DNA analysis of material from the tarp, soil samples from the grave, and re-examination of Jennifer's car with modern methods all provided new insights. A partial DNA profile was extracted from the tarp that didn't match Jennifer. When run through databases, it matched a man named Anthony Russo, who'd been a known associate of Calabresi and had done enforcement work for the organization. Russo was currently serving time in a federal prison in Quebec for an unrelated murder conviction. When confronted with the DNA evidence linking him to Jennifer Walsh's death, he initially denied any involvement, but facing the possibility of additional murder charges, and with his lawyer negotiating for a deal, Russo eventually agreed to provide information about what had happened to Jennifer. In a formal statement given to police in July 2008, with his lawyer and a Crown prosecutor present, Anthony Russo described the events of November 14, 1998. Vincent Calabresi had been using River's Edge pub for meetings related to his drug distribution network. Jennifer, working late shifts, had been present during several of these meetings. Calabresi had assumed she wasn't paying attention, just another bartender doing her job. But on November 6th, 8 days before Jennifer disappeared, she'd inadvertently overheard a conversation about a shipment of cocaine coming into Ottawa, and the names of police officers who were being paid to ignore it. She hadn't realized what she'd heard, but Marcus Delvecchio had noticed her listening and reported it to Calabresi out of fear for his own safety. Calabresi decided Jennifer was a liability. She'd seen too much, heard too much. Even if she didn't currently understand the significance of what she'd overheard, she might later connect the dots or mention it to the wrong person. Vincent ordered her taken care of, Russo's statement read. He told me and another guy, Leo Marchand, to handle it quietly. Make it look like she ran away or had an accident. Don't bring heat on the organization. Russo and Marchand had surveilled Jennifer for several days, learning her schedule and habits. They'd learned about her escort work through Diane Mercier's agency. One of her clients was connected to the organization and had mentioned her. They'd considered using that as cover, making it look like something related to her escort work had gone wrong. But the opportunity that presented itself Friday night was simpler. We knew she closed the bar alone on Friday nights. We waited in the parking lot, in Leo's car. When she came out and got in her Honda, Leo walked up and tapped on her window. Jennifer recognized him from the pub. He'd been there a few times with Vincent. She thought he was just a regular customer. She rolled down her window to talk to him. That's when Russo had approached from the other side, opened the unlocked passenger door, and gotten into the car. We told her we just wanted to talk, ask her some questions about something she might have seen at the pub. She was scared, but she cooperated. Leo drove her car, told her to stay calm and nothing bad would happen. I followed in our car. They'd driven to the pre-prepared site in Carp. The grave had been dug days earlier, waiting. Jennifer had realized what was happening when they pulled onto the dark, isolated property. She tried to run. Leo caught her. I hit her with a tire iron. It was quick. She didn't suffer long. They'd buried her body, then driven her car back toward Ottawa. The plan had been to leave it somewhere that would make it look like she'd run away or met with foul play unrelated to the organization. The location near Britannia Park had been chosen because it was far from Carp, far from the pub, and might suggest a different narrative. Russo had driven Jennifer's car to Britannia Park while Marchand followed in their vehicle. They'd wiped down obvious surfaces, though clearly not thoroughly enough given the DNA evidence that would eventually be found. They'd left her purse and phone to make it look like she hadn't planned to disappear. They'd taken only the bank deposit bag from the pub, which had contained just over $300, a petty theft that barely registered against the horror of murder. What happened to Leo Marchand? Investigators asked. Dead. Vincent had him killed about 6 months later for a different matter. His body's probably in the Ottawa River somewhere. The statement was clinical, matter of fact, describing a young woman's murder as if it were a routine business transaction. But it provided closure. Anthony Russo pleaded guilty to first-degree murder in the death of Jennifer Walsh. In October 2008, he was sentenced to life imprisonment with no possibility of parole for 25 years, to be served consecutively with his existing sentence. Robert Walsh attended every day of the proceedings leading to the guilty plea. He sat in the courtroom, staring at the man who'd admitted to killing his daughter, his expression a mixture of grief and rage. When given the opportunity to make a victim impact statement, Robert stood before the court, his voice steady despite his tears. Jennifer was 26 years old. She was smart, kind, hardworking. She was studying psychology because she wanted to help people. She worked at a bar to pay for school, and she was killed because she was in the wrong place at the wrong time, because she overheard something she didn't even understand. For 10 years, my family lived in agony, not knowing what happened to her. We hoped she was alive. We prayed she would come home. That hope sustained us, but it also tortured us. Now we know the truth. Jennifer died terrified and alone, murdered by cowards who saw her as nothing more than a problem to be eliminated. This man in front of us took my daughter's life, buried her like garbage, and went on living his life while we suffered. I have no forgiveness to offer. I have only the small comfort of knowing he'll spend the rest of his miserable life in prison, and that Jennifer can finally be laid to rest properly. Jennifer Walsh was buried in Notre Dame Cemetery, in a ceremony attended by hundreds. Her headstone read, Jennifer Marie Walsh, 1972-1998, beloved daughter and sister, gone but never forgotten, justice finally served. The case was officially closed. The mystery that had haunted Ottawa for 10 years was solved, but questions remained. Marcus Del Vecchio was dead, so he would never face charges for his role in alerting Calabrese to Jennifer's inadvertent eavesdropping. Craig Morrison's obsession with Jennifer turned out to be exactly what it appeared, creepy and inappropriate, but not connected to her death. Tyler Hoffman's angry confrontation the night she disappeared was tragic timing, but nothing more. The phone records that had led nowhere, the security footage that had shown nothing suspicious, the abandoned car that had seemed so mysterious. All of it made sense now. Jennifer had left the pub alone, exactly as the footage showed, but within minutes, she'd been intercepted by killers who'd been waiting for their opportunity. Detective Sarah Brennan, who'd never fully let go of the case even after moving to other assignments, attended Jennifer's burial. She stood at a distance, watching the Walsh family lay their daughter to rest, feeling the familiar mixture of satisfaction and sorrow that came with finally solving a case. The investigation had taken 10 years, followed dozens of false leads, suspected innocent people, and almost failed completely. Only the chance discovery of a grave during unrelated construction had brought the truth to light. Do you think it was worth it? A younger detective asked Brennan after the service. 10 years of resources, all that work. For a case that was only solved by accident? Brennan looked at Robert Walsh, standing by his daughter's grave, finally able to say goodbye. Every single hour was worth it, she said. Jennifer deserved justice. Her family deserved answers. That's what we do. We don't give up, even when it takes 10 years. In the following years, the Jennifer Walsh case became a cautionary tale taught at police academies and forensic science programs. It demonstrated the importance of never closing a missing person investigation, of following every lead no matter how minor, of keeping evidence secure even when a case goes cold. Robert Walsh lived to be 83, passing away in 2017. His obituary mentioned that he'd spent the last years of his life advocating for families of missing persons, helping establish support groups, and pushing for legislative changes to improve how police handle disappearance cases. Miranda continued her sister's legacy in her own way, establishing a scholarship at Carleton University in Jennifer's name for students studying psychology who demonstrated financial need. She gave occasional interviews about the case, always emphasizing that Jennifer was more than just a victim. She was a real person with dreams and talents who deserved to be remembered for who she was, not just how she died. The River's Edge pub building eventually became a Vietnamese restaurant, then a coffee shop, then sat empty for several years before being renovated into condominiums. New residents living in those condos rarely know the building's history, that a young woman worked her last shift there before being murdered by organized crime enforcers. The parking lot where Jennifer walked to her car for the last time is now a small public park with benches and flower beds. Nothing marks what happened there 20-plus years ago. The wooded lot in Carp where Jennifer was buried became the subdivision that had been planned. Houses now stand where her grave was found. Families live there. Children play in the yards, completely unaware that the land once held such darkness. But Jennifer Walsh is not forgotten. Her name lives on in the scholarship that helps students achieve their educational dreams. Her story reminds investigators never to give up on the missing. Her memory is kept alive by the nieces and nephews who learn about the aunt they never met. And the truth that took 10 years to uncover remains. On November 14, 1998, a bartender finished her shift, locked the door behind her, and walked to her car. She should have driven home safely, should have woken up Saturday morning to study for exams, should have lived the rest of her life. Instead, she was murdered by criminals who saw her life as meaningless. Justice came late, but it came. Epilogue. The ripple effects. The resolution of Jennifer Walsh's case in 2008 sent shockwaves far beyond the immediate circle of her family and the investigators who'd worked the case. The revelation that organized crime had infiltrated Ottawa to such a degree that they could murder a young woman with apparent impunity sparked public outrage and political consequences. The detail that particularly enraged the public was Russo's admission that corrupt police officers had been on Calabresi's payroll. The Crown prosecutor handling Russo's plea deal pressed him for names, offering additional considerations in exchange for information about law enforcement corruption. Russo provided 3 names. 2 were retired officers who'd left the force years earlier. The third was still active, a staff sergeant named Donald Pritchard, who'd worked in the Drug Enforcement Unit during the late 1990s. The investigation into Pritchard revealed a disturbing pattern of compromised cases, evidence that had mysteriously disappeared, and raids that somehow always happened after drug dealers had moved their product. Pritchard had been careful, clever, and for years had escaped detection. When confronted with Russo's testimony and the forensic accounting of his finances that showed deposits he couldn't explain, Pritchard initially maintained his innocence. But faced with overwhelming evidence, he eventually accepted a plea deal in exchange for providing information about the extent of Calabresi's influence within law enforcement. The scandal consumed Ottawa police for months. Internal Affairs conducted dozens of interviews. Several officers were disciplined or forced into early retirement. The chief of police held a press conference apologizing to the Walsh family specifically and the public generally for the corruption that had festered within the department. Jennifer Walsh's murder might have been solved years earlier if not for officers who betrayed their oaths, the chief said, his expression grim. We failed her. We failed her family. We failed this community. That ends now. Detective Sarah Brennan, who'd worked Jennifer's case from the beginning, was promoted to inspector and put in charge of a new anti-corruption unit specifically designed to prevent future infiltration by organized crime. It was bittersweet recognition, acknowledgement of her dedication to the case, but also a reminder that Jennifer's death could potentially have been prevented. In private moments, Brennan tortured herself with what-ifs. What if they'd pushed harder on the organized crime angle in 1998? What if they'd discovered Pritchard's corruption earlier? What if Jennifer had been warned about what she'd overheard before Calabresi ordered her killed? But Lawrence Winters, the private investigator who'd worked for the Walsh family, offered her a different perspective during a conversation at a law enforcement conference in 2009. "You can't solve a crime you don't know is a crime," Winters said. "In 1998, you were investigating a missing person. You followed the evidence you had: the boyfriend with the temper, the stalker customer, the questionable business practices at the pub. All of those were legitimate leads. You couldn't have known that organized crime had already buried her body in carp before you even started looking. We should have known about the corruption in our own department." Brennan countered. "Pritchard had been dirty for years and nobody caught him. That's not on you personally. That's a systemic failure. What is on you is that you never closed Jennifer's file. You never stopped looking, and when her body was finally found, you made sure the people responsible faced justice. That counts for something. It counted for something to the Walsh family, certainly." Robert Walsh, in one of his final interviews before his health declined too severely to continue public appearances, spoke about the resolution of Jennifer's case with a mixture of grief and gratitude. "I'll never forgive the men who killed my daughter," Robert said, his voice hoarse with emotion. "But I'm grateful to the investigators who never gave up on finding the truth. Detective Brennan, Inspector Brennan now. She could have let this case fade away. Instead, she kept it alive. When Jennifer's body was found, the evidence was still properly stored, the files were still accessible, and justice could be served. That matters." Miranda Walsh channeled her experiences into advocacy work that would define the rest of her life. In 2009, she helped found the Ontario Missing Persons Coalition, an organization dedicated to supporting families of missing persons and pushing for better investigative practices and resources. "When Jennifer first disappeared, we didn't know what to do," Miranda explained during the coalition's inaugural press conference. "We didn't know how to navigate the police investigation, how to organize searches, how to deal with the media, how to cope with the emotional trauma. We figured it out as we went along, but we shouldn't have had to. No family should have to face that alone." The coalition provided training for police departments on family liaison, established support groups for families dealing with missing persons, and advocated for legislative changes including a national missing persons database and standardized protocols for investigating disappearances. One of the coalition's early victories was the passage of Jennifer's Law in 2011, which required police departments to immediately investigate missing adult cases where suspicious circumstances existed, rather than waiting 24 or 48 hours, as had been common practice. The law also mandated that DNA samples from unidentified remains be entered into a national database and cross-referenced with missing persons reports. If Jennifer's Law had existed in 1998, would it have saved my sister? Miranda asked rhetorically during the legislative hearings. Probably not. She was likely already dead before she was reported missing. But this law might save someone else's sister, someone else's daughter. That's what we're fighting for. The scholarship established in Jennifer's name at Carleton University grew beyond Miranda's initial contribution. Once the full story of Jennifer's murder became public, donations poured in from across Canada. By 2015, the Jennifer Walsh Memorial Scholarship was funding 3 full tuition awards annually for students studying psychology, social work, or criminology. The recipients were chosen not just for academic achievement, but for demonstrated commitment to helping others and overcoming adversity. Many of the scholarship winners came from difficult backgrounds themselves: poverty, abuse, family dysfunction, and were working their way through university just as Jennifer had been doing. At the annual scholarship ceremony each spring, Miranda would speak to the recipients about her sister, not about how Jennifer died, but about how she lived, about her kindness to difficult customers at the bar, her patience in explaining complex concepts to struggling classmates, her optimism that she could make a difference in people's lives through her chosen career in psychology. Jennifer never got to become the psychologist she dreamed of being, Miranda would say. She never got to help the people she wanted to help. But through this scholarship, through all of you, her legacy continues. You're carrying forward her dream of making the world a little better, one person at a time. The escort agency connection in Jennifer's case sparked important conversations about the vulnerability of sex workers and the importance of protecting them from violence. Diane Mercier, who'd run Executive Companions, had closed the agency shortly after Jennifer's body was found, unable to continue operating under the shadow of what had happened. But in 2010, Diane emerged from retirement to work with advocacy groups pushing for decriminalization of sex work in Canada. She testified before parliamentary committees, gave interviews to media, and used Jennifer's case as an example of why pushing sex work into the shadows made workers more vulnerable to violence. Jennifer was doing legal work for my agency. Companionship, nothing more, Diane explained in testimony. But she kept it secret because of the stigma, because she was afraid of judgment. That secrecy meant that when she disappeared, investigators didn't initially know about this entire aspect of her life. Critical time was lost. If sex work wasn't stigmatized, if workers didn't have to hide, they'd be safer. They could report threats, seek protection, and police could investigate crimes against them more effectively. The arguments Diane and others made contributed to changing attitudes and eventually to legislative reforms, though full decriminalization remained controversial and incomplete. Denise Cartwright, Jennifer's co-worker at River's Edge Pub, had quit bartending entirely after Jennifer's disappearance. She'd gone back to school, become a nurse, and rarely spoke about her connection to the case. But in 2013, she agreed to be interviewed for a true crime documentary about Jennifer's murder. "I think about her all the time," Denise said, tears streaming down her face during the filming. "I was the last friend to see her alive. I left her there at midnight to close up alone. And I've spent 15 years wondering if things would have been different if I'd stayed. Would those men have waited if two of us had been there? Would they have picked a different night? Would Jennifer still be alive?" The documentary filmmaker gently reminded Denise that Russo and Marchand had been specifically targeting Jennifer, that they would have found another opportunity if not that particular Friday night. "I know that intellectually," Denise replied, "but emotionally, I still feel like I abandoned her. I tell myself that if I'd been there, maybe I could have called police when those men approached. Maybe Jennifer and I could have fought them off together. Maybe she'd have had a chance." The documentary, titled The Bartender's Secret, aired on CBC in 2014 and won awards for its sensitive handling of Jennifer's story. It included interviews with the Walsh family, Detective Brennan, Lawrence Winters, and even a brief phone interview with Anthony Russo from prison, in which he showed no remorse for his actions. "It was business," Russo said coldly. "Nothing personal against the girl. She was a liability to the organization. That's how it works. If I hadn't done it, someone else would have." The casual brutality of Russo's words shocked viewers and generated renewed discussion about organized crime violence and the dehumanization that allows people to commit such acts. Tyler Hoffman's family reached out to the Walsh family after seeing the documentary. Tyler had died in 2015, but his sister contacted Miranda to express condolences and to share that Tyler had never forgiven himself for the confrontation at the pub the night Jennifer disappeared. "He blamed himself," Tyler's sister wrote in a letter to Miranda. "He thought if he hadn't gone to the bar that night, if he hadn't upset Jennifer, maybe she would have left earlier or later. Maybe the timing would have been different, and those men wouldn't have gotten to her. He carried that guilt until the day he died. I wanted you to know that Tyler loved your sister, despite their problems. Her death haunted him." Miranda responded with grace, acknowledging Tyler's grief, while gently noting that the responsibility for Jennifer's death lay solely with the men who'd murdered her. "Tyler didn't kill my sister. Vincent Calabresi and his enforcers killed my sister. Tyler was just another person whose life was damaged by their violence." Craig Morrison never reached out to the Walsh family, but his name surfaced again in 2016 when he was arrested a second time for stalking. This time, a woman who worked at his gym. During the investigation, police searching his apartment found a disturbing shrine to Jennifer, newspaper clippings about her disappearance, printed photos from her social media, even a menu he'd apparently stolen from River's Edge Pub as a memento. Craig was evaluated psychologically and diagnosed with erotomania, a delusional disorder characterized by the belief that another person is in love with them. He'd convinced himself over the years that he and Jennifer had shared a special connection, that she'd been killed to prevent them from being together, that her murder was somehow related to their relationship. The discovery was disturbing, but also, in a way, provided closure to lingering questions about Craig's behavior. He hadn't been involved in Jennifer's murder. His obsession was genuine mental illness rather than guilt-driven behavior. He received court-ordered treatment and a restraining order preventing him from contacting the Walsh family. The revelation about Marcus Delvecchio's role in Jennifer's death, alerting Calabresi that she'd overheard sensitive conversations, sparked outrage among those who'd known him. Though Marcus had died years before the truth came out, his family faced backlash from the community. Marcus's son, Anthony Delvecchio, who'd been 15 when Jennifer was murdered and had no knowledge of his father's criminal connections, struggled with the revelation. In 2017, he wrote an op-ed for the Ottawa Citizen, apologizing on behalf of his family. "I can't undo what my father did," Anthony wrote. "I can't bring Jennifer Walsh back. I can only say that I'm horrified by his actions and by the choices he made that led to her death. My father chose to protect himself rather than protect a young woman who worked for him, who trusted him. That makes him complicit in her murder, and I'll carry shame for that for the rest of my life." The Del Vecchio family donated a substantial sum to the Jennifer Walsh Memorial Scholarship as a gesture of atonement, though they acknowledged that no amount of money could make up for the loss. As the 20th anniversary of Jennifer's disappearance approached in 2018, the Ottawa Police Service held a ceremony honoring cold cases that had been solved through persistent investigation and advances in forensic science. Jennifer's case was prominently featured, with Inspector Sarah Brennan speaking about the importance of never giving up on victims. "Jennifer Walsh was missing for nearly 10 years before we found her," Brennan said to the assembled crowd of officers, officials, and families of victims. "During those 10 years, her case was never officially closed, but I'll be honest, there were times when it felt hopeless. No new leads, no new evidence, no idea where to look, but we kept her file active. We kept her DNA on record. We kept hoping that someday, somehow, something would break." Brennan paused, her voice thick with emotion. "When construction workers found Jennifer's body in Carp, we were ready. The evidence was preserved, the investigation could move forward, and because we'd never given up, we were able to bring her killers to justice. That's the lesson here. Every victim deserves that commitment. Every family deserves to know we won't forget." The ceremony included a moment of silence for Jennifer and other victims, followed by the unveiling of a memorial plaque in the police headquarters lobby, listing the names of murder victims whose cases had been solved after going cold. Jennifer's name was there, along with the dates. Jennifer Marie Walsh, 1972-1998. Justice delayed, but not denied. Robert Walsh had passed away by this point, but Miranda attended the ceremony with her children. Her daughter Jennifer, now a teenager, laid flowers at the base of the memorial plaque, honoring the aunt she'd been named for. "Do you think Grandpa would be happy about this?" young Jennifer asked her mother. "I think he'd be grateful," Miranda replied. "And I think he'd be proud of how many people have worked to make sure your aunt's death meant something, that it led to changes that might protect others. The changes were indeed significant." Beyond Jennifer's Law and the Missing Persons Coalition, the case had influenced how police approached disappearances of young women, especially those who worked in bars, restaurants, or other late-night industries where they might be vulnerable. Training programs now taught officers to immediately investigate the full scope of a missing person's life: official employment, side jobs, relationships, potential threats, without making judgments about the victim's choices. The initial investigation into Jennifer's disappearance had been slowed by the fact that police didn't know about her escort work, which meant they'd missed a potential avenue of inquiry. "We need to approach missing persons cases without stigma or bias," the training materials emphasized. "A woman working as an escort deserves the same investigative effort as a woman working as a teacher. A person struggling with addiction deserves the same commitment as a person who's never used drugs. Our job is to find them and protect them, not to judge their life choices." The advances in forensic DNA technology that had helped solve Jennifer's case also led to breakthroughs in other cold cases. The Ottawa Police Service established a cold case unit specifically dedicated to re-examining unsolved disappearances and homicides using modern techniques. By 2020, the unit had solved 12 previously cold cases, bringing closure to families who'd waited years or even decades for answers. Each time a case was solved, the investigators would credit Jennifer's case as inspiration and motivation. "If we could solve Jennifer Walsh's murder after 10 years, with minimal physical evidence, we knew we could solve others," explained Detective Lieutenant Marcus Chen, no relation to the original Detective Chen who'd worked Jennifer's case, who ran the cold case unit. "Her case showed us that persistence matters, that technology changes, that evidence you have today might become useful in ways you can't predict tomorrow. So we never throw anything away, we never stop looking, and we never forget the victims." The location where Jennifer's body had been found in Carp became an informal memorial site, despite the fact that houses now stood on the land. The family who owned the property where the grave had been discovered, unaware of the history when they'd purchased, graciously allowed Miranda to place a small marker in their garden. The marker was simple, a a stone with a bronze plaque reading, "In memory of Jennifer Walsh, whose life mattered and whose death brought change. You are not forgotten." Neighbors learned about the marker's significance and began leaving flowers there, especially on the anniversary of Jennifer's disappearance each November. The family who owned the property started tending the area specially, planting perennials that bloomed each spring, daffodils, Jennifer's favorite flower. "We didn't know Jennifer," the homeowner told a journalist in 2019. "But we know her story, and we know that this land, which was once the site of something terrible, can also be a place where her memory is honored. Our children know about Jennifer. They help plant the flowers each year. They understand that evil things happen in this world, but good people fight back against that evil. Jennifer's family fought for justice. The police fought for justice, and we can contribute by making sure she's remembered." The documentary, The Bartender's Secret, was updated in 2020 with new footage of the memorial site, interviews with scholarship recipients, and information about the lasting impact of Jennifer's case on law enforcement practices. The updated version ended with footage of Miranda Walsh speaking at the Missing Persons Coalition's annual conference. "My sister has been gone for over 20 years now," Miranda said. "Most of my life has been lived without her. My children never met their aunt. My father died without getting to see his daughter again. The loss is permanent, irreversible, and still painful every single day." But Jennifer's death also sparked change. It exposed corruption. It led to better laws. It created support systems for other families facing what we faced. It pushed law enforcement to do better. Does that make her murder worthwhile? Absolutely not. Nothing justifies what was done to her. But since we can't bring her back, we can at least ensure that her death meant something, that it made things better for others. That's what I want people to remember. Not just that Jennifer was murdered, but that she was a person with dreams and kindness and potential, and that her loss inspired people to fight for justice, to protect the vulnerable, to never give up on finding the missing. That's her legacy. That's what survives. The speech received a standing ovation from the hundreds of attendees, families of missing persons, law enforcement officers, victim advocates, and volunteers who searched for the lost. In 2023, 25 years after Jennifer's disappearance, Anthony Russo became eligible for parole. The hearing was brief. Miranda submitted a victim impact statement opposing his release, noting that Russo had never shown genuine remorse for murdering her sister. The parole board agreed. Russo was denied parole and told he would not be eligible to reapply for 5 years. He would spend at least 30 years in prison total before having another chance at freedom, and given his age and health problems, he would likely die incarcerated. "Good," Miranda said when she heard the decision. "He took Jennifer's life, took away her future, everything she could have become. He deserves to spend the rest of his life paying for that." As 2025 approached, marking 27 years since Jennifer's disappearance, the case remained a touchstone in Canadian true crime, studied in criminology classes, and referenced in discussions about missing persons investigations. A new generation of investigators, too young to have worked the original case, learned about Jennifer Walsh as part of their training. They studied the mistakes made, the initial delay in recognizing the seriousness of her disappearance, the failure to discover her escort work sooner, the missed connections to organized crime. They also studied the successes, the meticulous evidence preservation that allowed for eventual justice, the family's advocacy that kept the case alive, the detective who never stopped caring about a victim she'd never met alive. Inspector Sarah Brennan, now in her early 60s and nearing retirement, occasionally gave lectures to new police recruits about the Jennifer Walsh case. She would stand before classes of young officers and tell them Jennifer's story from beginning to end. "You'll work hundreds of cases in your career," Brennan would say. "Most will be straightforward. Some will be complex. A few will haunt you for the rest of your life." Jennifer Walsh's case is one that haunted me, not because I failed to solve it. Eventually we did solve it, but because it taught me that sometimes doing everything right still isn't enough. Sometimes evil wins in the moment, and justice has to wait. Your job is to make sure justice doesn't wait forever. Keep the files. Preserve the evidence. Never forget the victims. Because you never know when a construction crew will find a grave, when a new technology will unlock old evidence, when a criminal will decide to confess. You need to be ready for that moment, even if it comes 10 years or 20 years or 30 years later. Brennan would then show the recruits photographs. Jennifer smiling in her Carleton University student ID photo. Jennifer behind the bar at River's edge looking professional and capable, and finally, the memorial plaque with her name. The contrast between the vibrant young woman in the early photos and the cold finality of the memorial always had an impact. This is why we do this job, Brennan would conclude. Not for the easy cases that solve themselves, for the Jennifer Walshes, for the families who deserve answers, for the victims who deserve justice, no matter how long it takes. The Ottawa River, where Jennifer's car had been found abandoned all those years ago, continued to flow through the city, constant and unchanging. The Britannia Park where the car had been discovered had been renovated and expanded over the years. New playgrounds, new walking paths, new benches where people sat and watched the water. Very few of the people using the park knew that it had once been part of a mystery, that an abandoned car had sparked a massive investigation, that the discovery of that car had been a crucial piece of evidence in a murder case. The park was just a pleasant place to spend an afternoon, not a landmark in a tragedy. But on November 14th each year, without fail, someone would leave flowers at the parking lot where Jennifer's car had been found. Sometimes it was Miranda. Sometimes it was one of Jennifer's former classmates or coworkers. Sometimes it was strangers who'd learned her story and wanted to pay respects. The flowers would stay for a day or two before park maintenance removed them, but they'd be replaced the following November. A small ritual, a quiet remembrance, a way of saying that Jennifer Walsh was not forgotten, and she truly wasn't forgotten. Her name lived on in scholarships and laws. Her story educated new generations of police officers. Her family's advocacy helped countless other families navigating the nightmare of missing loved ones. Her case demonstrated both the failures and successes of the justice system. 27 years after she locked the door of River's Edge pub for the last time, after she walked to her car expecting to drive home safely, after she was intercepted by killers who saw her as nothing more than a problem to be eliminated, Jennifer Walsh remained present in the world she'd left behind. Not as she would have wanted. She would have preferred to live, to finish her degree, to become a psychologist, to help people, to have a family of her own, but present nonetheless, in the changes she'd inspired, and the people she'd touched, and the memory that refused to fade. That's what remains when a bartender disappears after a night shift, when security footage shows her leaving alone, when her car is found abandoned at a river, when phone records lead nowhere, and the case seems unsolvable. What remains is the determination to find the truth, no matter how long it takes, the commitment to justice, even when delayed by years, the refusal to forget, to let a victim become just another statistic. Jennifer Marie Walsh, 26 years old, bartender and student, daughter and sister, victim and symbol, found at last and laid to rest with dignity, remembered always.